executives for coming on to this webinar. We understand that you're key partners for us, and I really appreciate the fact that you're on the front lines for the association. And so we wanted you to get this information first. This webinar, as you can see, is being recorded. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, once it's published, please share this with your members, share it with your key stakeholders. We're doing everything we can to communicate as much about the settlement as possible for multiple reasons, but to dispel some false narratives, rumors, and to empower you and your members and your colleagues to be able to set the record straight. So with all that said, why don't we get started? Can we bring up the first screen, please? Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We want to spend our time today to share some more details on the settlement agreement that we announced on March 15th. You'll see that I'm joined by NAR's Chief Legal Officer, Katie Johnson. Katie, wave, say hi.
Hello.
And before we dive into today's presentation, I just want to take a moment to thank each of you for your continued hard work on behalf of our association. I know I have shared this with many of you in recent days, but I want to reiterate that I have full confidence in the ability of each of you to help lead our organization and our industry into the days ahead. So today, Katie and I will be going over the terms of the settlement agreement. We'll also be addressing questions that we've heard from you all since announcing this important news last Friday. That's on March 15th. We'll end by sharing more about our path forward. As you all know, for the past several years, we've managed litigation against NAR with the interest of our members at the forefront. And consumers. Since the verdict in the Sitzer-Burnett case in October, the scope of litigation issues has expanded dramatically. Obviously, now there are new copycat lawsuits that have been cropping up across the country, drawing in additional defendants, brokerages, MLSs, associations, and increasing risk and uncertainty in our industry. Ultimately, we believe this settlement agreement to end the litigation of claims brought on behalf of home sellers related to broker commissions was the best outcome we could achieve in the circumstances. This agreement is subject to court approval. So before I turn it over to Katie, let me just provide a brief overview of the key terms of the settlement. First, one of NAR's critical achievements in this resolution is to release most of NAR's members and many industry stakeholders from liability in these matters. NAR fought hard to include as many people and companies in the release as possible and achieved a release for everyone it could. The agreement would resolve claims against NAR, over 1 million NAR members, all state, territorial, and local realtor associations, all association-owned MLSs, and all brokerages with an NAR member as principal that had a residential transaction volume of less than $2 billion in 2022. NAR was also able to secure a mechanism for the excluded MLSs and most brokerages to be covered by the settlement if they chose to use it. Second, NAR has agreed to put in place a new rule prohibiting offers of compensation on the MLS. This practice change will go into effect mid-July in 2024. And third, while NAR has been advocating for the use of written agreements for years, in this settlement, we've agreed to require MLS participants working with buyers to enter into written representation agreements with their buyers. This change will also go into effect mid-July 2024. Fourth, as part of the settlement, NAR agrees that we will pay $418 million. Approximately, it will take us 4 years to make those payments. And I can assure you that NAR's membership dues for the remainder of 2024 and 2025 will not change because of this payment. Lastly, it is important to note that the settlement makes clear that NAR continues to deny any wrongdoing in connection with the MLS cooperative compensation model, the MLS model rule. That was introduced in the 1990s in response to calls from consumer protection advocates for buyer representation. So now let me turn it over to Katie Johnson. Katie?
Thank you, Kevin. Let's start with the release of liability. I know there have been a lot of incorrect statements in the media and elsewhere about the releases in the settlement. So to be clear, nearly every realtor is covered by the release we negotiated. The members not covered under our release are those affiliated with Home Services of America, the last co-defendant in the Sitzer-Burnett litigation, and the employees of the co-defendants in the Gibson and Oompa cases. If a member is affiliated with any of the brokerage groups listed on this slide, and they are an independent contractor licensee, they are covered by the proposed settlement, even if their brokerage may not be covered. In addition, all other realtors who are members of NAR on the date of class notice are covered by the release we obtained under this proposed settlement. The date of class notice is anticipated to be in mid-July. Realtors on the date of class notice, as well as state, territorial, and local realtor associations who are also released under this settlement, must abide by the practice changes set forth in the agreement, but do not need to take any other action in order to benefit from this negotiated release. Realtor Association-owned MLSs must complete and submit Appendix B within 60 days of the filing of the motion for preliminary approval in order to benefit from the release. This must be completed by the MLS only. The motion for preliminary approval, which triggers that 60-day time period, has not been filed yet, but it is anticipated to be filed within the next couple weeks. Now, for nearly all brokerage entities that had a residential transaction volume in 2022 that exceeded $2 billion, and for MLSs that are not wholly owned by realtor associations, NAR also secured in the agreement a mechanism for them to obtain releases efficiently if they so choose to use it. So to be clear, the agreement does not obligate these brokers or MLSs to do anything, but it provides an option to be included in the release if they so choose. The opt-in for brokerages whose total sales volume in 2022 exceeded $2 billion is found in Appendix C of the agreement and lays out two paths for obtaining a release. Option 1, a brokerage can elect to pay an amount based on a predetermined formula that takes into account the average total residential sales volume for that brokerage. If this formula is unsatisfactory, the brokerage can pursue option 2, where they can elect to participate in non-binding mediation within 110 days following the preliminary approval of the settlement. Brokerages can also choose not to participate in the settlement at all. Now, the opt-in for MLSs that are not wholly owned by realtor associations is found in Appendix D of the agreement, and it lays out two similar paths for obtaining a release. Option 1, the MLS can elect to pay an amount based on the number of their subscribers. Or option 2, if that formula is unsatisfactory, the MLS can elect to participate in non-binding mediation within 110 days following preliminary approval of the settlement. These non-realtor association MLSs can also choose not to participate in the settlement at all. It is important to note that all agreements reached through this mechanism would still be subject to NAR's settlement being approved by the court. I would also like to emphasize that NAR fought to include as many people and companies in the release as possible and achieved a release for everyone we could. Ultimately, NAR was able to ensure that agents, even those at brokerages that are not covered, are among the well over 1 million members being released. But despite NAR's best efforts, plaintiffs would not agree to include everybody. We believe that those that are not released, the largest companies in our industry, are no worse off now than they were before the settlement. In fact, they may be better off as thousands of their independent contractor real estate agents are released by the settlement. And now they can choose whether or not to use the mechanism NAR negotiated. I want to take a moment here to speak about the news that you may have seen today regarding Compass's settlement agreement. The Compass settlement shows that while brokerages are free to opt in to NAR settlement, they may also reach individual settlements on their own terms. Compass is paying far less than the press reports claimed they would after our settlement. Again, NAR fought to include as many people and companies as possible in our settlement and achieved a release for everyone we could. But the large broker settlements, the cases that were still pending against other corporate defendants, and some brokers' attempts to settle themselves made it impossible to achieve 100% coverage. The settlement announced by Compass is not surprising given plaintiffs' desire to treat each corporate defendant separately. Independent contractors affiliated with Compass are covered under NAR's proposed settlement. Now, let's turn to another term of the agreement. As you know, NAR has agreed to put in place a new rule prohibiting offers of compensation on the MLS. Offers of compensation could continue to be an option consumers can pursue off MLS through negotiation and consultation with real estate professionals. And sellers can offer concessions on an MLS, for example, concessions for buyer closing costs via the MLS, provided that such concessions are not conditioned on the use of or payment to a buyer broker. In addition to prohibiting offers of compensation from being communicated on the MLS, the agreement prohibits MLSs from creating, facilitating, or supporting any non-MLS mechanism for making offers of compensation between listing and buyer brokers. However, the agreement expressly provides that realtors may display offers of compensation to buyer brokers on their own websites for their own listings. This change is expected to go into effect in July of this year, and we know there are a lot of questions regarding this rule change and the implementation. NAR staff and members are working hard to prepare and share materials for our members, associations, and MLSs to understand and implement these rule changes in the months ahead. Now let's turn to another significant practice change. NAR has also agreed to enact a new rule that would require MLS participants working with buyers to enter into written agreements with their buyers before the buyer tours a home. Using buyer brokerage agreements will mandate what we have long encouraged our members to do: enter into written agreements that help consumers understand exactly what services and value will be provided and for how much. The settlement agreement requires that the buyer broker agreement clearly sets forth the amount of compensation, how this amount will be determined, and where it will come from. The buyer broker agreement must provide that the broker will not receive compensation for brokerage services from any source that exceeds the amount agreed to in the agreement with the buyer. Now, we know there are a lot of questions about this rule change as well, and we will work diligently with our state associations, local associations, MLSs, and members to support efforts to provide useful buyer brokerage agreements that conform to the state law and to the terms of this settlement. This change is also expected to go into effect in July of this year. In the meantime, check out become.abr.realtor for education on using buyer representation agreements. So Kevin, now I'm going to turn it back to you to discuss the terms of the payment.
Thanks, Katie. Under the terms of the agreement, NAR is responsible to pay $418 million over approximately the next 4 years. In terms of timing, NAR will make a $5 million payment within 30 days of preliminary approval by the trial court. NAR will then make a $197 million payment 90 days after final approval by the trial court, which would likely end up being near the end of the year. Then NAR will make annual payments of $72 million on the anniversary date of that $197 million payment for the following 3 years. We recognize that this is a substantial sum, and it will be incumbent upon NAR to use our remaining resources in the most effective way possible to deliver on our core mission of making sure that we continue to help our members be successful. Please know that NAR's membership dues for 2024 and 2025 will not change because of this payment. Lastly, the settlement makes clear that NAR continues to deny any wrongdoing in connection with the MLS Cooperative Compensation Model Rule, the MLS Model Rule. NAR has long maintained, and we continue to believe, that cooperative compensation and NAR's current policies are good things that benefit buyers and sellers. They promote access to property ownership, particularly for lower and middle income buyers who can have a difficult enough time saving for their down payment. With this settlement, we are confident that NAR and our members will still achieve all of those goals. As mentioned, the settlement is subject to court approval. That is a process that we expect will take many months. And in large class action settlements like this one, objections and opt-outs are common. We will advocate for court approval throughout this process. And we will also move to have seller litigation involving the cooperating compensation model rule stayed as to NAR. We will continue to keep you updated on the approval process and the implementation of new rules. So Katie, would you please speak to timing and the next steps?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. First, note that some of the dates on this timeline on this slide are still tentative. As you know, on March 15th, the settlement agreement was signed. On March 22nd, we expect the plaintiffs to file a notice of settlement. Meanwhile, NAR will proceed to withdraw our pending motions and request a stay in the litigation. By the end of March or early April, we anticipate the filing of a motion for preliminary approval. During the 60 days following that motion for preliminary approval, it's imperative that all Realtor MLSs execute Appendix B, as I mentioned previously. Brokerages above $2 billion in total residential sales volume and non-Realtor MLSs will also want to adhere to the timeline set forth in their respective appendices in order to be classified as released parties in the settlement if they so choose. In early April, we expect preliminary approval on the motion. Then, as we approach mid to late July, we will implement the practice changes that are part of the settlement. By the end of July, we expect class notice to be disseminated. In September, we anticipate the filing of a motion in support of final approval. Then finally, looking towards the end of the year, we estimate the final approval hearing will occur in December, which will mark the culmination of the settlement process and hopefully a approval of the final settlement. Kevin, back to you.
Okay, so I know that there's some questions that we've received by our members in recent days. So let's get to asking and answering those questions. The first question is, why did we enter into this settlement? Since the litigation began, we've worked consistently to reach a resolution with the plaintiffs. We've always wanted to reduce a significant strain on our members and provide a path forward for our industry. And from the beginning of this litigation, we had two goals. One was to secure a release of liability for as many of our members, associations, and MLSs as we could. And second was to preserve the choices consumers have regarding real estate services and compensation. This proposed settlement achieves both of those goals and provides a path for us to move forward and continue our work to preserve, protect, and advance the right of real property for all. Let's see, another question that we have, and Katie, I'm going to ask you to answer this one. Does this settlement mean that NAR is admitting that plaintiffs' allegations are true?
No. The settlement makes clear that NAR continues to deny any wrongdoing in connection with the Multiple Listing Service Cooperative Compensation Rule. It has always been NAR's goal to resolve this litigation in a way that preserves consumer choice and protects our members to the greatest extent possible. As you said, Kevin, this settlement achieves both of those goals. Now, this agreement significantly reduces the liability nationwide for well over 1 million NAR members, all of our state, territorial, and local realtor associations, all association-owned MLSs, and all brokerages with an NAR member as principal that had a residential transaction volume in 2022 of $2 billion or below. Ultimately, continuing to litigate would have hurt members and their small businesses. So the agreement provides a path forward for our industry and NAR.
Okay, so Katie, you talked about the $2 billion threshold. How does the settlement affect brokerages that are not included in the release?
Okay, so I explained it earlier and I'm going to explain it again. The agreement provides a mechanism for nearly all brokerage entities that had a residential transaction volume in 2022 that exceeded $2 billion and for MLSs that are not wholly owned by realtor associations to obtain releases efficiently if they so choose to use it. Again, NAR fought to include as many people and companies in the release as possible and achieved a release for everyone we could. Well over 1 million members are covered, as are tens of thousands of realtor businesses. So the scope of the release makes clear that NAR looked out for its members. But despite our best efforts, plaintiffs would not agree to include everyone. Those that are not released, the largest companies in our industry, are no worse off now than they were before the settlement. In fact, we think many are better off, as thousands of their independent contractor real estate agents are released by our settlement. Now the brokerage businesses can choose whether or not to use the mechanism NAR negotiated. Our options included reaching a settlement whose terms were always going to be affected by the large settlements reached by other corporate defendants, or continuing to appeal the Sitzer-Burnett verdict and litigate the related cases. Now, that second option likely would have resulted in our filing for Chapter 11 protection, leaving all members, associations, MLSs, and brokerages exposed. In the settlement, NAR, we continue to deny any wrongdoing, as I just said, and nothing in the settlement requires NAR to undercut the position of remaining corporate defendants in the litigation. We will continue to support all members, including those not released.
All right, and so Katie, what do association-owned MLSs need to do to be covered by the release?
Okay, so I mentioned it previously. Association-owned MLSs need to execute an appendix to the agreement in which they agree to abide by the practice changes in the agreement. So that appendix is Appendix B. We will help make that readily available. The timing of the submission is 60 days after the motion for preliminary approval is filed. That motion for preliminary approval has not yet been filed and is anticipated to be filed within the next couple weeks. So we will keep you all aware of the timing as we proceed in implementing the settlement. Okay, now Kevin, let me ask you a question. How will buyer brokers get paid now?
So we've long believed that it's in the best interest of sellers, buyers, and their brokers to make offers of compensation. Unfortunately, though, using the MLS to communicate these offers of compensation will no longer be an option. So offers of compensation, while they can continue to be an option that consumers can pursue off MLS through negotiation and consultation with real estate professionals. The types of compensation available for buyers brokers would continue to take multiple forms depending on broker-consumer negotiations, including but not necessarily limited to a fixed fee commission paid directly by the consumers, a portion of the listing broker's compensation. Compensation would continue to be negotiable and should always be negotiated between agents and the consumers that they serve.
So Kevin, I have a few financing questions for you. First, what are interested party contributions?
Yeah, interested party contributions, there's something that we deal with regards to Fannie and Freddie Mac and FHA. They specify limits on how much a seller or broker can contribute to the buyer to pay for services typically paid for by the buyer. These payments are called interested party contributions, IPCs. So is compensation paid by a seller or listing broker to a buyer broker considered an IPC? The answer is no. The agencies exclude fees that are traditionally or customarily paid by the seller from IPCs.
Okay, what about VA loans and the prohibition on buyers paying commissions directly?
Yeah, this is a question that we've gotten a lot, and obviously it's a concern for us. The VA has not addressed whether it will change its requirement prohibiting VA buyers from paying the commission. NAR has engaged with the VA on this issue, and we remain committed to working with the VA so that veterans are not left out of the market or forced to consider alternative loan products. So we do have an FAQ on these financing questions available. It's available now on facts.realtor, FACTS.realtor. All right. Katie, how about how quickly do you expect that the settlement will be reviewed and or approved by the court?
Right, this process is going to take many months. There are strong grounds for the court to approve the settlement because it is in the best interest of all parties and class members, as we will argue. But as I said previously, we are expecting final approval of the settlement near the end